Hello, everyone, and welcome to tonight's Monsoon Awareness Hangout. I'd like to thank everybody who is joining us. We're also going to be trying to join people on Facebook as well, so hopefully they can also interact with us once things get going there. So this is Monsoon Awareness Week. Each night this week, we're focusing on one thread of the monsoon season. I believe, what is today? The 14th. So monsoon season officially starts tomorrow. So we are focusing on the threats of monsoon season. Monday, we talked about heat, and that's what we've got staring us in the face from Phoenix to Tucson to Vegas. We are looking at some very, very hot temperatures. El Paso is getting up there as well. So it's looking very, very hot. And so that's what we're looking at right now is the monsoon threat of heat. And actually, that's a good thing in a way. I'm not going to say that the super hot temperatures, because I'm seeing temperatures like Phoenix is going for like 119 early next week. That is some crazy temperatures. But sometimes we need that heat low to develop across the Southwest, and then that will help drive the monsoon flow and to bring in that moisture eventually. So basically, we do have heat. Tuesday, we talked about downburst winds. Today, we're talking about blowing dust. I almost forgot why we're even here. So we're talking about blowing dust, which is a direct result of those sometimes those winds that come out of those thunderstorms. And then on tomorrow night, we'll be talking about lightning. That's my favorite. I love lightning. So we're going to have a great discussion on lightning. We have a weather expert on lightning from the Visala Corporation over in Tucson. And then on Friday, we'll wrap Monsoon Awareness Week up with a discussion on flash flooding. But tonight's a great night. We got a great panel set up. We are going to be talking blowing dust. And I don't think people really realize how dangerous blowing dust is. And we're going to talk about some safety tips. A lot of us who do realize about blowing dust think it's kind of a threat for cars that are driving down the road and everything. But it's also a health threat, and we're going to talk about that as well. But joining me on the call tonight, I'm going to go down the line here. We got Mr. Dan LeBlanc, who is a forecaster in the Flagstaff office. How are you doing tonight, Dan?
I'm doing well. Thank you, Tim.
Very good. Moving on down the line here, we've got Ken Waters. He's the warning coordination meteorologist over in the Phoenix office. How are you, Ken?
Good, Tim. Glad to be here.
Very good. Also at the El Paso office with me is Miss Marissa Pazos. She's be pulling pictures for me, and maybe we can get her to answer a question along the way here. Then as we go over to the next people down the line, we've got our friends out in San Diego. We got Stephanie and I've forgotten Mr. Miguel. That's right. I remember, I knew it began with an M, and I just couldn't remember off the top of my head. So thank you, Miguel, for reminding me. And then finally, we have our guest speaker tonight, who is I called you a dustologist before you got in here, but this is Dr. Tom Gill. He is a professor at University of Texas at El Paso. How are you doing tonight, Dr. Gill?
Very good, Tim. Thank you very much for the invitation to join the group.
I am so glad that you could join us. So, all righty, we've got the threat of dust. And we talked about yesterday how we get these real strong winds coming out of these thunderstorms. And a lot of times these winds will pick up this dust and it starts blowing across the roads. It starts really impacting people. It can impact people's health. So let me ask either Stephanie or Miguel. I've heard a lot of people call things a dust storm, and I've heard people call things a haboob. What is the difference between a haboob and a dust storm?
Actually, there is no difference. It's just two different terms to describe the same type of event.
It's a trick question. So basically, they're the same thing. You know, I know another term. We have hurricanes and cyclones and tropical storms. Basically, they all cover the same thing. So the same kind of animal. So it's basically the same thing. If you hear the word, you can change out their terms for dust storm or haboobs. And then, Miss Marissa, if you'll zoom in on that a little bit closer, There you go. Perfect. This is a dust storm. Does that say where it is? I see Mesa, so I don't know exactly where that is, but this is a nice dust storm that is rolling in someplace, probably in Arizona. They have very photogenic haboobs or dust storms out there. So very good. But basically, if we say haboob or dust storm, it's the same thing. Quick quiz for anybody on the panel. What does haboob stand for? Does anyone know?
I believe it's an Arabic term for
Yes.
dust storm.
I believe you are correct. It was just a quiz. Actually,
More or less, I think the literal translation is strong, very strong wind.
Yeah, violent wind.
And it comes from Sudan. It comes from the Khartoum area.
very good. I see on Facebook, Isaiah has joined us. I'm glad you could join us, Isaiah. Feel free. Oh, how I got going too fast here. I forgot to mention. If you want to ask us any questions, please do. Please, you can tweet at us using the hashtag that you see there on my lower third. It's Monsoon, hashtag Monsoon 2017. But for a lot of people, if you're watching on YouTube, you can just type into the YouTube chat that's there on the side of the window and ask your questions. And for those of you watching us on Facebook, feel free to make a comment there like Isaiah did. And I will try to, I'm monitoring all of these different resources. So feel free to ask us any questions about blowing dust, its safety, you know, your safety, the health effects or anything like that. So please do. Now, speaking of that, hey, Dan, we've seen pictures. We just saw a picture of that haboob as it's moving across the desert floor.
Yes.
And so many times you can, as you're driving along, you see this big wall of dust coming. What are some specific safety tips that motorists can make to stay safe during a dust storm?
Well, the first thing, if you see it in the distance, you would want to get away from it. If you should happen to be in it, what you would want to do is slow down and then move your car to the right side of the road, off out of the lanes of travel. You want to turn off your lights and engine, and then you do not want to touch your brake pedal and make those lights flash. So
Why are we supposed to stay off of our brakes? Do you know?
Because people might think you are slowing and that it's okay to travel behind you when in fact you're stopped and not going anywhere.
So what if I understand what you're saying here, basically, if you're caught in one of these dust storms, like you said, initially the best thing to do is if you see it coming, just avoid it. Get off the road, stop at a rest stop. You know, don't try to drive into it. But if you do find yourself in it and you have like near zero visibility, what you need to do is just pull as far over to the right-hand side of the road to get yourself off the road. I guess basically don't stop in the road, because I've seen lots of stories where people stop in the road, right?
And they get rear-ended, yes.
Oh, that's horrible. And I know that out, we have some dry playas out in part of western New Mexico, and we get either strong spring winds or these haboobs that work off the mountains to the north will cause the blowing dust to go across the highway. We've had several fatalities out there from just that very thing, people stopping in the road and not being able to, and then cars coming behind them and either not seeing them or they don't realize the cars have stopped. So like you said, get as far over to the right-hand side, get out of the lane of traffic, and then stay off your brake, because like Dan was saying, if people see your brakes, they're gonna assume that you are still, they're going to try to follow you and they're going to pull in right behind you. And again, the visibility is so low. And then Miss Marissa has a great shot here of some, one of these, probably what we're called, sometimes we've been doing studies on these blowing dust channels. They're not very deep and they're not very long, but as you drive through them, they have zero visibilities. So I'm reading a question here from Clint. Why are dust storms in the fall and winter months potentially more severe and destructive than in the springtime? The question isn't really about the monsoon. I'll touch on that real quick. during the wintertime, it's colder temperatures can make the winds and the dust kind of impact the vehicles a lot harder. So that's a good question. Thanks for asking it. Remember, if you have any questions, just type them either in the chat on Facebook or on YouTube. So back to the safety tips. Basically, get out of the road and avoid making yourself look like you are in the road. And then Miss Marissa is pulling up some great stuff here. So good tips. Now, we have talked about the safety aspects of these dust storms. I'm going to ask Ken. Ken he's done a lot of research on dust storms in Arizona, and talk about some of the work that Ken you have done on helping us detect dust storms, especially in and around in Phoenix and Tucson's area.
Okay, yeah, thanks, Tim. Well, yes, it basically it was a project to employ very inexpensive hardware that it's almost like hobbyist type hardware with things like Arduino and Raspberry Pi, some little objects you may not have heard of, but inexpensive, and basically putting a few parts together for only about $100 or so. And then taking that device and deploying it out in the field, and our initial efforts came out very well. We actually detected a number of good dust events, especially the large scale ones, the Haboob type storms. Like some of the pictures that we saw before. So there's a lot of promise in this, and there's hope that we're going to be able to expand to maybe into a project that Arizona Department of Transportation is working on. There you go. And for a lot more money, but basically putting some sensors along an area of Interstate 10 that's very problematic for dust storm. It's about halfway between Tucson and Phoenix. So
hey Ken, describe to us what we're seeing here on the screen.
Okay, yeah, the picture there, that little device there, the circuit board, that's an Arduino, and basically what you see, the wires hooking up to a little bit below that is actually a dust sensor. The dust sensor, believe it or not, only costs about $12, just that part itself. The Arduino is about $30 or $35, and with a few other parts, keeping it all within about $100, we're able to hook something up. And in addition, we've even experimented with putting a camera on it. There's some inexpensive camera add-ons for about $30. So it's a way to keep costs down, but still have the effectiveness of being able to detect the dust storms. And the goal was to get as many of those out there as possible in order to provide kind of a density deal, like enough so that you can get a little warning, you can see the wave of the dust storm moving.
And how many do you have any out in the field right now? And if so, how many do you have deployed right now?
Well, we kind of maxed out early last year. We had, I think we were up to about 10 at one time. But what happens is you've got to keep maintenance going on that. And unfortunately, there were some issues with the heat starting to kind of destroy some of the storage cards on there. So they were starting to drop off the network in the springtime. But we're hoping to get a few more out there this year in time, maybe in the next couple of weeks.
Very good, very good. I've seen the results, and maybe, I don't know if you describe what's the information that you get back in from them. Is it a line graph? Is it a sensor reading? How do you receive that information?
Basically, it's measuring, it's estimating the particulate density. It's how many of those fine dust particles are out there, and it uses an optical system in that very small little device there. And what I found is when all of a sudden you get in the wall, the dust, the first part of the dust, it's like a 100 times magnitude. It's like no question about it. On the graph, the counts just shoot up. It's like a vertical spike.
Wow, very good. And like you said, you can get that back, and that comes into you real time.
Pretty much within about a minute or so.
Wow, amazing, amazing. Now, we're going to come back to this because it's great to get that information in, but then what do we do with it? And I know that you've helped spearhead what's coming along very soon for several of the Southwest weather offices, and that's the convective dust storm warning. But that's a little preview. Not yet. Not yet. We'll get to that here in a minute. I want to touch base with Dr. Gill here because he's been doing research on all kinds of aspects of dust. And Dr. Gill, what is some of the areas of research that you and your students have been working on?
So we've been working in several areas. First, trying to understand better just the statistics and the phenomenon of the dust storms in the Southwest. Exactly where are they coming from? What type of land? What type of sites? What type of areas? When? Are those patterns changing? And then also, too, what are some of the impacts, especially now going into health and safety? Of course, you've already talked about the safety angle from highway travel and motorists. You know, pull aside, stay alive. But there are other impacts with that. And moving it back to the start, as I said, a lot of it starts with trying to understand exactly when and why and like what type of soil and what type of lands the dusts may be preferably coming from, to try to get an advance warning on exactly what areas are vulnerable to making dust, so we can keep a close eye on them as the windy seasons approach.
Right now, I know that we've had problems, especially over in southeast Arizona. It actually, when we were in the springtime, when we get our kind of a wider scale wind events, I think most of us are familiar with those. There was some land there that was having trouble. They weren't properly taking care of it, and it was causing just this one area on Interstate 10 to get dust moving across it. It was causing accidents, and it was beginning to become a hazard where it didn't take much wind to get dust blowing across the road. So you're saying that sometimes how people maintain their land can actually make a difference on whether you get dust or not off of it.
Unfortunately, that really appears to be the case. Certainly, especially here in the Southwest and many of the other dusty parts of the world, you know, like the Sahara Desert, you know, the dust comes naturally off the desert. However, disproportionately, we are seeing here in the Southwest as well as in other areas that a disproportionate amount of the dust is coming from small areas. And unfortunately, a lot of it is what I would say is places where the land has been disturbed or really not taken care of properly by human activity. That example you gave in southeastern Arizona on I-10 in the San Simon Valley, you know, clearly it's a case, for example, where some fields had been tilled right before the windy season. They were not being properly managed, and a improperly cared for land plus wind next to the highway is really a recipe for disaster. And we're seeing that unfortunately in a number of other areas in the Southwest, that kind of small parts of the landscape, unfortunately, again, places where the land maybe has not been properly managed, are disproportionately causing a lot of these dust storms. So we have to watch that very carefully.
I know that for us in our area of responsibility for El Paso, one of the things that we had happen several years ago was out about by, like I mentioned before, Lordsburg, we have these dry lake beds. And what was happening was that people were going out there, and I guess that they can take these vehicles with the big sails on them and the wheels, and they can use the wind to kind of parasail across the flat ground. But what they were doing at the same time was that they were chewing up that dry lake bed. And then once either we had a windy spell come across, or we had a thunderstorm drop one of those downburst winds, and it was blowing dust all across of the interstate there along I-10 on the New Mexico side of I-10. So I can definitely see how you're saying how land is managed can make a big difference on whether you get a lot of dust or no dust off of some property.
That's a really good example. These dry lake beds or playas, for example, as you said, in Lordsburg, as well as for our friends over in Arizona, the one near Wilcox and others. Naturally, after a rain, after they dry out, the surface of these dried lake beds will form a fairly hard kind of cemented crust. But if you disturb it, especially through off-road vehicle activity, that surface protective kind of like skin or shell on the surface gets chewed up, and it just exposes a tremendous amount of loose dirt and very, very fine particles that are sitting right underneath it. And all you need is maybe not even that much wind then to just puff them up into air and cause a big dust cloud.
Well, let me ask, anybody on the panel, and maybe Dr. Gill or Ken, kind of our dust experts, is there a certain wind speed that we need to pick up this dust? Because we talked about yesterday when we were talking about downburst winds, we were talking that you can get winds up to 100 miles an hour. Sure, that's going to pick up a lot of dust and move it around. But is there like a minimum threshold that we need to get dust? Is it 20 miles an hour, 30 miles an hour, 40 miles an hour, or something like that? Or is it just variable depending on, like we talked about, the different land conditions?
And I'll also ask Ken to chime in. I think what you said is true. A lot of it depends on the conditions in a particular area. The type of soil, how loose it is, whether or not you've got big, heavy sand grains or very tiny, loose dirt. And also things for especially how wet the ground surface might be. When you have a kind of a wet, muddy surface, it's not going to blow as much as when something is really dried out, which is why it's very important to, know the land, know the soil, know the conditions in your area. And then the other thing is, as I said, land that's really been badly chewed up and the very loose dirt has been exposed will blow away at a much lower wind speed than something, let's say, that is naturally sealed by a crust or might have some grass or vegetation growing on it.
Or two. Anything else, Ken?
Yeah, I know at one of our workshops, I forget all the details, but one of the researchers had did a presentation on that about like what is that minimum threshold of wind velocity that's required in order to pick up the dust. But to tie on to what Dr. Gill said, I also want to mention, hope I'm not jumping the gun on this, there's another factor, and that's drought in the Southwest. And we've kind of long believed that drought is a factor to basically, making more dust available because we're losing vegetation, especially in certain areas. And there's been a little bit of evidence to show that there is an uptick in the number of dust storms, at least in Arizona, during drought years. So, and that goes back, I think some of the data we did back in the 2000 decade, we saw a little bit of that indication. So that's another factor in the mix. How long has it been since it rained? And also, this all relates to what kind of wind is required in order to pick up that dust.
Very interesting.
Very true. Even a little bit of vegetation growing on the ground will keep that wind off the surface. And after a drought, you're more likely to lose that vegetation cover. It's going to die off and go back, and it just makes the soil that much more vulnerable to the wind.
Very true. Very, very interesting. So antecedent conditions are very important to potentially the dust as far as getting it blown around. Real quickly, because we have quite a geographic difference here, I want everyone to basically describe your area of your responsibility for your forecast office. And I'm going to start with Dan. And my question for you, Dan, real quickly is, do you guys get a lot of blowing dust into Flagstaff, or is it a problem for the lower elevations of your area of responsibility? And then kind of describe your area of responsibility.
Okay. I'm working in Flagstaff, Arizona, and we have 5 counties here that we do the forecast for: Coconino, Navajo, Apache, Yavapai, and northern Gila counties. So we're going up, touching the Utah border there. FGZ is our call sign. As far as problems with dust, for us, most of the time it is in the fall, winter, and spring due to the passage of cold fronts. So we can have, when we see wind gusts in excess of 50 miles per hour in certain spots along I-40, just west of Winslow is one area, that can shut the highway down. So we can also occasionally in the summer have the microburst winds if it hits the right area. Once again, blowing dust, reduced visibility. There have been a couple of times when big kaboobs have come out of Tucson, thrown a big wall of dust across the Phoenix area, and that dust cloud moves north into Prescott and the Flagstaff area. We know this because the visibilities at the airport go down to, like, in the case of Prescott, it was like 4 miles at 5 a.m., that's pretty remarkable.
Oh, thank you. I'll go talk to Miguel or Stephanie over there in San Diego. I know we talked about this, the last time you guys were on the call. It's San Diego. You guys don't have to worry anything about dust. It's beautiful, sunny at the beach. Again, remind everybody what area of responsibility that you guys cover, and is dust a problem for any parts of your area?
Sure. Our forecast area covers the beaches all the way into the deserts bordering Phoenix's forecast area. So especially with the monsoon, we do get thunderstorms over our deserts, or even ones that will form over Sonora, Mexico, or Imperial Valley with outflow that moves into our forecast area. And there's plenty of barren landscape out there in our desert areas of San Diego County, Riverside County, and up into San Bernardino County. And we've had a few instances, even within the last couple years, of large areas of blowing dust associated with those thunderstorm winds. So our area does cover more than just the nice beaches. We do have mountains and deserts in our forecast area as well.
Very good. So you talked about, you guys have you got topography, you've got the ocean right there, and they sometimes interact in very interesting and challenging ways.
Yeah, so especially with the ocean and the mountains in there, I mean, our CWA, our forecast area, elevation ranges from below sea level to almost 11,000 feet.
Wow.
And then we have the marine influence on top of that. So we'll get sea breeze convergence zones around our mountains, or even kind of that more southeast or east monsoon flow converging with our sea breezes off the ocean. And that can trigger thunderstorms. So it is quite complex for being such a relatively small forecast area.
Very good. Thanks for sharing that. Hey, Ken, can you talk real briefly about the area of responsibility for Phoenix and some of the dust challenges that you have?
Yeah, you bet. Well, as the map shows that you had up there a moment ago, we include not only a part of Arizona, but we also stretch into California, picking up Imperial County and about the eastern half of Riverside County. And this whole area in general is just a very common area to get dust storms, whether it's in the California portion or Arizona. And most of that area gets frequent dust storms. Maybe the only exception is some of the higher terrain that you see off in that little corner there on the right part of the map. But I want to point out that in particular, there's one area that's extremely susceptible, that historically we've had huge problems with dust. And that's kind of an area that's shared with our neighbors to the south, the Tucson office. It's basically a little belt of Interstate 10 about halfway between Phoenix and Tucson. And we've had some absolutely horrendous dust storms and terrible accidents out there, fatal accidents quite frequently. So a lot there, but there's other areas. Interstate 8 gets some dust storms. We get some in the California side in Imperial County, along with some blowing sand, because there's some pretty good sand dunes down there, just to the west of the Colorado River. So it's definitely a very, very active area for dust storms.
Very good. And I'm glad you're there to kind of do that research and get those sensors deployed. It seems like they'll be very useful. I know I'll talk real briefly about our area of responsibility for the El Paso area. We basically cover South Central and Southwest New Mexico. It's EPZ there on the map, and a little sliver of far west Texas. We are also prone to dust storms. We get in the springtime. We get what we call the synoptic dust storms, where that's that big wind, and you see that big dust comes up out of Mexico and moves across the area. But we also are prone to dust storms during the convection, during the monsoon season. Like I mentioned, there's several places around our area that have these dry lake beds, and you put one of those downburst winds in the right spot, and you can get for sure some blowing dust. And like we said, it just depends on the state of the land, the antecedent conditions to get that dust up and going. Now, somebody on Facebook kind of mentioned that, they've seen dust storms in Iraq. We're not prone to, we're not the only part of the world that gets these dust storms. Am I not correct? Or what other parts of the world do they occur in?
Well, we're really fortunate that here in the Southwest, yes, we get dust storms, but they're nowhere near as bad and as frequent and as severe as in many parts of the world. I've worked with some geographer friends to define what we call a global dust belt that goes across Africa from the Sahara over to Egypt, across Arabia, Iraq, Afghanistan, all the way to interior China, like the Gobi Desert. And the amount of dust there is, maybe 10 to 100 times worse or more frequent than it is here in the Southwest. We think we have it bad, but it's much worse in other parts of the world. On the other hand, for the Western Hemisphere, the southwestern deserts of North America are really the dust hotspot of the New World, and that's why we're dealing with this topic.
Very good. Interesting. Yeah.
I think also besides the desert Southwest, there's other parts of the United States even where dust is a big problem. Central Valley in California is one. The Owens Valley, on the lee side of the Sierra Nevadas, and I know Eastern Washington. We've had situations. Eastern Colorado, to the east side of the Rocky Mountains, and some of us might remember some of the videos and pictures from like Amarillo and Lubbock, where we've gotten some pretty bad dust storms. So it's a real problem.
Yeah, that area just to our east and north, it was literally the Dust Bowl, about 80 years ago, and they gave that area the name the Dust Bowl for a reason.
Yeah. Very good. So it is not, other people suffer along with us. We're just not suffering along by ourselves in the Southwest with this blowing dust. So basically, we've talked about kind of some of the safety hazards, how it can affect. I didn't even mention it. It can affect aviation. It can affect people driving on the highways. But there's a health component to it, and I was wondering if any of you guys can talk about the health effects of this dust, not only from the particulate matter in the air to exactly what is in the air that's being blown around. So, maybe Ken, if you could touch on some health, the safety tips for people, and then maybe Dr. Gill can talk about, what is exactly being blown around, something like that.
Yeah, this is actually quite a problem here in Arizona, and I think also I believe some statistics said it showed a problem in California as well. Basically, as I understand, it's spores that are intermixed with the dust, And when we get those big monsoonal dust storms or haboob storms coming through, it picks up all that material. So it's not just dust. There we go. And it's also basically biologic material that gets ingested. And there's been some studies kind of show that typically after maybe a few weeks after one of these really large scale dust storms, we get a higher incidence of valley fever. And that's a very dangerous condition that even one of our National Weather Service meteorologists at our office came down with it. And it can put you in the hospital for a week or two, and in some cases, unfortunately, even lead to death. So it's a real serious concern here, and it's something we got to take seriously. It's also a reminder to not go outside as another safety tip, not to go outside in the middle of a dust storm and just check things out, because you're breathing all that in, and that can't be good.
I know that people may have in the Phoenix area have heard of valley fever. Can you describe a little bit more what that is? Because I don't think that is as commonly known here in like New Mexico, and maybe even I'm not sure in Southern California there.
Oh boy, I wish we'd had the meteorologist I talked to, because he of course could give us the real explanation of what it feels like. So I don't know that much about the actual symptoms, other than that it does put you in the hospital, put you out for, oh, there we go, thank you. That helps. It's really a very subtle thing. We get a few cases of this every year, and as I said, we do unfortunately get folks that succumb to it. So it's something to be taken very seriously.
Very good. Well, it's something serious. I think, Dr. Gale, correct me if I'm wrong, but I have heard that we're finding more and more cases of it. I'm not going to say it's spreading, but we're finding cases of it even in New Mexico. Is that not correct?
Yes, actually. So valley fever, as Ken said, it's actually caused by the spores of a fungus that lives in desert soil. But when that desert soil gets whipped up into the air, if you inhale those spores, it can make you seriously ill. With regards to valley fever, it's sometimes hard to tell because the reporting criteria for the medical community has changed, but there's some evidence that it does seem to be more frequent. It also could be possible, for example, that the population in the Southwest is growing. Everyone likes to live in the Sun Belt, so we're getting more and more housing developments, built at what used to be the edge of the desert. The soil is being broken up, land is being cleared and open up for new housing, and that fungus that might have been living in the soil for eons suddenly becomes exposed. The other thing I wanted to mention about valley fever, that a lot of us don't realize, is not only is it a potentially very serious health problem for us, for people, but it is also a very serious disease for our animal friends, for our pets. So be very, very careful. If, maybe you might want to think twice about, not exposing your pets to a dust storm. There we go. Maybe allow them to come inside when the dust is really blowing. And after the dust is blowing, if you notice your pet is having trouble breathing or coughing or showing some symptoms, get veterinary attention to your pet as well, because it's, these spores will impact, not only people, but all of the animals as well.
Oh, the dust affects either us or our animals. Whoever's breathing that in is going to be affected. Again, I wanted to remind everybody that if you have any questions, you feel free to type it into the live chat, or if you're on Facebook, type them in there. We'll be happy to answer them. So that's what we're here for, is to try to answer your question. So if you do have a question, type it into the chat on Facebook or on YouTube, or you can tweet us with the hashtag there you see under my name, which is Monsoon 2017. Now, I'll open this up to everybody on the panel, because we talked about specifically about valley fever. what are some other health threats that that can occur from the dust? You know, I assume all this stuff blowing around isn't good for people, especially people who have some perhaps breathing issues in the first place. Isn't that correct?
If you have especially the elderly, especially young children whose bodies may not have been fully developed, and especially anyone who's had or has a respiratory or a breathing disease, especially things such as asthma. You know, even if the dust doesn't have those spores or anything otherwise toxic in it, you know, you're breathing in little tiny particles of sand, which can almost be like glass, that can really irritate your airways, your lungs if they get into them. So anyone who has respiratory problems or has had some sort of lung disease, especially asthma, needs to be extra careful of staying out of the dust.
Well, I guess that leads into my next question here. What are some health, you know, dust safety tips? We talked about when you're driving, pull over, turn off your lights, stay off your brakes, get as far over. If you are already at home and you either see on the news or you get a convective dust warning that says, hey, there's a haboob on the way, what should people do? Can either Ken or Dan or anybody hop in there and give me an answer there?
I'll go ahead and start. Well, we've already touched on a lot of it. From our perspective, two main areas of impacts. One is transportation, and with the cars and all. And Tim, you hit on something that I like to hear, that where you said just don't even go into it in the first place. If you can avoid it, just try not to drive into it. But transportation-wise, it's not just cars. It affects airplanes. We've had several instances where major international airport, Phoenix Airport, is closed down for maybe an hour or two due to dust, because the airplanes can't fly in it. They can't see. It's really a huge problem. And then in the health aspects, we talked about just not going out in the dust. That's what I always tell people. Don't get caught out. Try not to get caught out in the middle of the dust. But if you do, seek some kind of shelter. Go inside. Anything that can protect you a little bit. So those are the big things I could think of. Maybe some others have something to add.
I would like to add that not only is there a health cost, but there's an economic cost when planes can't land, trucks can't travel on the highway. People wind up going to the hospital, because of the stuff they have breathed in. So there's an economic side to this as well.
Right. Oh, that's very interesting, Dan. That's exactly right, that there is an economic impact, and that's why it's important to let people know that this dust, this convective dust is coming out. And I say convective dust to kind of separate it out from, because in the springtime, so many of us here in the Southwest are used to that. We get those real strong winds and it affects an entire region, and we get this big billowing dust comes up. It's very similar in nature, but it affects a large kind of area. Ken's been working on a project with the National Weather Service on these convective dust warnings, and basically it would be, I guess, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but it'd be akin to like a severe thunderstorm warning. Is that not right, Ken, to let people know that this small area of dense dust is headed in a certain direction?
That's correct, Tim. One thing that we're familiar with tornadoes and trying to get the warning out as quickly as possible, take cover, act fast, you don't have much time, that sort of thing. Well, I'd like to say that the dust storms are a very similar phenomenon, at least here in the desert Southwest, with the big monsoonal dust storms, haboob storms. Because if you're driving along, you don't have a lot of time to think about it, and you can sometimes be caught in just a matter of a few minutes by one of these dust storms. So we've basically been working to kind of change the way that we issue those warnings, if you will, and going to more of a tornado-like type of scenario where we're gonna focus those warnings exactly where the dust storm is, and get that warning out really fast. And cell phone, most of us have one of these smartphones these days, and accordingly, also most of us have heard these alerts come out, the weather alerts, sometimes for tornadoes or flash floods and whatnot, but also dust storms. And so what's going to happen is, starting around this fall to winter time frame, we're going to be issuing dust storm warnings by polygon. So we're just, instead of just doing it by a county or a large area or what have you, we're going to focus on exactly where's the most dangerous threat with that dust storm, draw a polygon around it, and then when that signal goes out to the cell phones, now only the people that are inside that polygon, more or less, are going to be getting those alerts. Because in the past, the last few years, there's been situations where you could easily be 100 to 150 miles away from the dust storm and get one of those alerts. Well, we don't want to do that. We want to make those alerts make people take them very seriously as possible, and really focus on the actual threat. So I'm excited about this. I think this has been a long time coming, and I think it's going to dramatically improve our warning service as far as dust storms go.
Very good. I know while you were talking, we were showing a video of a haboob as it was moving in. I'm pretty sure that's someplace in Arizona, but it was a great example of, you basically had clear skies, good visibility, and you could see this wall of dust coming, and the car just drove into it, and almost within just a few seconds, the person driving the car went from good visibilities to near zero visibilities. They turned on the lights, didn't help. And we had talked about, if you can see this thing coming, just don't drive into it. And in that case, you could issue, like you said, that convective dust warning. When we say the word polygon, I don't know if everyone understands, but we use it for a severe thunderstorm warning or tornado warning. We draw a little square around where, like Ken said, we think that the main threat is, and we would be doing the same thing for that convective dust storm warning. And then, like he said, only people within that polygon, that area, that little square, would be alerted to the threat. Well, as meteorologists, let me ask anybody in the panel, whether it's Dan or Stephanie or Ken, when we're in the office and we see one of these thunderstorms pop up, and then is there any way for us to detect these dust storms as they begin to move out from the thunderstorms? I know that Ken talked about he's got sensors that you can deploy, but these are kind of small scale things, and you'd have to have a whole bunch of sensors scattered all over the place. Is there any other tools that we have that we can kind of see that dust as it moves out from these thunderstorms?
Well, Tim, not only is the radar detecting precipitation, it can detect dust. And so when we have the outflow wind hit the ground and spread out in a circle, as it travels away, many times that the radar is detecting the dust, and we can then watch its progression across areas of the state.
Very good. I know that yesterday we had a satellite image of a outflow boundary that, and I'm cueing Miss Marissa here to see if she can define that again. But it was a great example of how the outflow boundary, which is kind of the precursor of this dust, shows up on radar, and that you can see that on the radar as it moves out away from it. While she's trying to dig that up, is there any other tools that we have that we can use to kind of detect that dust out ahead of time?
Well, satellite imagery can help sometimes, but there's definitely some big limitations. The best it primarily is actually just simple visible imagery. Sometimes we can see that leading edge. Okay, there's nice radar depiction showing an outflow boundary. Satellite does work, although as long as we don't have too much cloudiness over it. But Tim, I'd like to make a point you hinted at early in the session tonight about these channelized dust events. Those are such small scale, as you mentioned. Maybe just maybe 100 feet, 200 feet wide, and only about 100 feet high. That it's really, really tough to detect them under just about any kind of technology that we have, satellite, radar, or just about anything else. And that's one of the factors that makes those types of situations very, very dangerous for us. If we did an analysis looking at the fatalities that have occurred in Arizona, we've done some analysis of this. We found that the more larger scale big events have occurred not from these big monsoonal dust storms that everybody sees. We get these dramatic Armageddon-like pictures of these walls of dust, but from those tiny little channel events. And I attribute that to kind of a surprise factor, if you will. Drivers aren't expecting it. It comes on very suddenly, and they go into it, and the mentality is, I just keep going 70, 75, whatever, and I'll be through this in just a matter of a few seconds. Well, when you start adding up a whole bunch of cars, with everybody thinking the same thing, and then all of a sudden, right in the middle of this narrow channel, suddenly there's cars that you can't even tell where you are on the road. You can't see the lines anymore. You have no perception, and of course you're going to slam on your brakes. And our experience has been we've had some absolutely terrible accidents. And again, just these small scale channel events. So this is one of the big things that we're working with the state and the transportation departments and whatnot to try to work on to reduce the injuries and fatalities from these events.
I know, like we mentioned earlier, a lot of times it's the same place over and over and over again that's being affected. If you drive on I-10, basically as you leave El Paso, especially as you leave Las Cruces, and I know all the way to the state line between New Mexico and Arizona, and I assume, and now that I think about it, I know as you move into Arizona, you always see the signs, dust storm, dust storms are prevalent in the area, watch out, and things like that. But I know that for our area of responsibility out by Lordsburg and Deming, we get certain spots, always seem to get it. We mentioned that place in southeast Arizona where the mismanaged land was giving them a lot of dust. So it seems like at the start we can find some spots that normally are prone to it, and then we can work, like you said, with our partners in the Department of Transportation to kind of help let people know that this is an area to be concerned about. And then if we can combine that with detection and getting the word out, we can help minimize some of these accidents and this loss of life due to blowing dust.
Absolutely, and that's a big effort here in Arizona. I go to a lot of meetings with several different initiatives where we're dealing with that, trying to address where are these locations that are particularly problematic. I mean, we know where they are. We can analyze the accident statistics, and it becomes obvious. And in most of those cases, it's a situation like what you're talking about, a mismanaged land and whatnot. And we've got it down to the actual milepost numbers that the responders, the highway patrol and whatnot, they know it by heart that these are problem areas. And so we're trying to tackle it from a number of angles. In some cases, actually interfacing with the property owner. We've done this in a couple of situations, and try to educate them and try to see, hey, can we work with the landowner somehow to provide some kind of mitigation efforts, whether it's doing some planting, whether it's doing irrigating, or just maybe some kind of artificial fence, if you will, to try to keep the dust from blowing right over the freeway. So it's really it's a big part of what I work on here. You know, the last couple of years working with our partner agencies. So it's a lot of my job, honestly.
Wow. Well, believe it or not, we have been talking for almost an hour now. So I want to give everyone a last chance. If you have any questions, be sure to drop them into the live chat on YouTube, on Facebook, drop a question there, or on Twitter using the hashtag Monsoon2017. But as we kind of wrap things up, I'm going to go down the line and just give us your last thoughts. It could be a safety tip. Maybe there's a website people can use to kind of to go and get some information on whether it's valley fever or health safety or anything like that. So feel free as I'm gonna pick on you one at a time here and just kind of summarize what you think people should take away as far as this particular threat of dust storms in our monsoon season. And I'm going to start with Dan here. Dan?
Well, thank you for having me. In closing, I would like to recommend that people look at our forecast and forecast discussion. Those come out several times a day. One of the weather types that we can indicate when we think when it's going to happen is thunderstorms with strong winds. So there's an indicator right there for you.
Very good. So always kind of stay weather aware. You know, during the monsoon season, almost every day seems like it can have thunderstorms in the forecast. But like you said, look for those keywords of, strong or blowing dust or strong winds associated with those thunderstorms, because not every day is the same day during the monsoon season. It may seem like it, but if you dig a little deeper, some days it's a heavy rain kind of threat. Some days it's a strong wind kind of threat. Some days maybe some isolated hail kind of threat. So like you're saying, Dan, keep an eye and look for those keywords of strong winds or blowing dust in the forecast or in our forecast discussions. Ken, do you have any final words?
Yeah, just kind of reiterate what I mentioned before. When you get those alerts on your cell phone, take them seriously. Always take them seriously, but especially now that we're going to be shifting to a more targeted dust storm warning. I think we're all about saving lives and property. So if you get one of those dust storm warnings, pull off the road if you're out there. Don't drive into a dust storm. And certainly try not to get caught out in the open in the middle of a dust storm. And thank you for inviting me, by the way.
Oh no, I'm glad that you've done so much work on doing research on these dust storms and getting those sensors deployed in and around Arizona. You were the perfect thought for this kind of topic. Let me jump over to our friends over in San Diego, Miguel and Stephanie. Do you guys have any final closing words?
Yeah, just to reiterate, try to make sure you don't drive into them. If there's one coming and you're indoors, stay indoors. Don't go out and try to see it. The health risks are not worth it. And then the last thing is, even with radar and satellite and our new fancy GOES-R products, webcams, all that stuff, we might always not know about them, especially in parts of Southern California where these occur, where our radar coverage is very poor or there's just not much out there. If you see something coming, to let the Weather Service know through Twitter, Facebook, official spotter reports. That way we can help out everyone else by issuing these new fancy dust storm warnings.
Very good. Thank you. Good words. Dr. Gill, any last parting words of wisdom?
Just a couple of things to remind people to be aware. If you have a regular path that you travel, regular routes of travel, think about, someday when the weather is nice, if a dust storm suddenly came up through this area, where would be a safe place to pull over? What should I do? How am I going to respond? Remember, pull aside, stay alive, and be aware to the places where you might see dust. Maybe not that bad on some days, but like, wow, if the wind got a lot worse, this is an area I really have to be on guard if I'm moving through. And then the last thing is, as we said before, if you experience a dust storm, And, afterwards you start feeling sick, you have a cough that won't go away, you start running a fever, or your family, or again, remember your pets, your animals start, acting lethargic, acting sick, not being well after a dust storm. Don't be afraid to get medical attention, because some of these respiratory diseases that the dust can come along with are very serious.
Yeah, and I thank you for reminding everybody that it can affect not only people, but also pets. So again, thanks to everybody who joined us. Remember, we've got 2 more nights of Monsoon Awareness Week. We've got lightning tomorrow night, which is the official start of monsoon season, June 15th. And then on Friday, we'll wrap things up with a talk on flash flooding. So check your National Weather Service office's social media channels, Facebook or Twitter, and find the links to those as we get ready to post them. But again, I want to thank everybody for joining us tonight. I want to thank Dan LeBlanc, who's forecaster over in Flagstaff, Ken Waters, who's WCM in Phoenix, Miss Marissa doing a fantastic job pulling up my the graphics there. We had Miguel and Stephanie out in San Diego, and our special guest, Dr. Gill, a professor over at UTEP, working in the area of blowing gusts. I want to thank all of you all for joining us tonight. It was a great conversation and lots of good information there, lots of safety tips, and lots of information that you can share and just take to help protect you and your family, whether it's a health safety tip or, as you're driving down the road, something to do. Make sure, like Dr. Gill said, pull aside to stay alive and don't step on that brake pad. So I appreciate everyone joining us on YouTube and on Facebook. It was a great time. And I just thank everyone for joining us. Have a great evening. Be sure to join us tomorrow night and on Friday. And remember, just keep an eye out of the weather and have a great evening. Bye-bye.